Hope your work week is off to a good start. You're watching the Daily Report for January 24th here in Korea. I'm Min Sun-hee. Korea has inked several deals on green initiatives with its counterparts in the Arab world. We have more on this later on the program after a check on the global pandemic situation. I have Kwon So standing by. So just start us off.
Sunny, we are starting off the new work week with something that has been highly forecasted by officials recently. The Omicron variant now appears to be the dominant strain here in Korea, with 50.3% of cases in the third week of January having been the highly transmissible strain. And that's also caused the surge in daily infections. This Monday, we're seeing 7,513 cases as of 12 a.m., and that is the second highest caseload the country has ever reported. It includes 7,159 domestic transmissions and 354 cases from abroad. Now, in the past days, we're seeing cases in the 7,000s also throughout the weekend. And if we compare this figure to last Monday, the number of cases has roughly doubled from a week ago. And on our map, we're seeing that all places except for Sejong City, Ulsan, and Jeju-do Island are seeing at least triple-digit figures of new infections, and the highest caseload in Gyeonggi-do Province with over 2,400 cases. And also the country has reported 25 additional fatalities, which has raised the death toll to 6,565, and the total amount of accumulated cases has surpassed 741,000 here in the nation. Now, what is, however, positive development we're seeing for the 5 straight days, the number of patients in severe or critical condition has remained in the 400s and has also dipped from the day before. And that is also attributed to the higher number of vaccinated people, although over the weekend we did not have that many COVID-19 vaccines administered. But let's take a look at the booster shots here. We've got now 49.2% of the nation's population that have received that additional COVID-19 vaccine shot. Let's move over to the international figures. 2.17 million new infections around the world, and a little over 4,300 people have lost their lives due to the virus in the past 24 hours as of noon Korea time. And over the weekend, the U.S. has now almost 72 million infections, and France has surpassed the caseload in the U.K. over the weekend, and the Netherlands now has more infections than the Ukraine as of noon Korea time. And those are the general updates that I have for now, but I'll have some more details on the international front in a bit. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, so thank you for the global tallies. Here in Korea, Omicron appears to be taking over the pandemic scene, and Kim Yeon-seung joins me now with details on that. Yeon-seung, good to see you again.
Thank you for having me, Sunny.
Right, so as I mentioned, Omicron is dominating our COVID-19 infections.
Yes, exactly. So experts have been projecting that reality for days now, and it seems like we finally reached that point. President Moon Jae-in said Monday that Omicron has spread rapidly to become the dominant strain in South Korea. He urged health authorities to quickly get ready for a faster response and for South Korean people to help in preventing the spread of the virus through diligent mask wearing and vaccinations, especially ahead of the upcoming Seoll날 holiday.
Right, Yeon-seung. And Omicron is accounting for what proportion of our daily cases so far?
Well, according to the Minister of Interior and Safety on Monday, around half of last week's cases were identified as Omicron infections. First, take a listen.
With Omicron infection spiking mainly in Gyeonggi-do Province and the southwestern Honam region, Omicron cases have been identified in around 50% of the cases nationwide.
And against the backdrop of the Omicron spread, cases are rising quickly, with an average of close to 6,000 daily infections being reported last week. That's a 50% jump from the week before. And I'm sure you remember, Sunny, but I was here last Monday when the daily caseload was at around 3,800 cases. And as Hoa mentioned earlier, a week later, the nation is reporting 7,513 cases, and it's double the tally from last Monday.
Right, and how is our healthcare system, Yeon-seung, coping with this reality?
Actually, the medical sector seems to be doing fine so far. Clerical cases are significantly lower compared to last month. Like Soa mentioned earlier, There were barely over 400 critical cases nationwide today compared to over 1,000 less than a month ago. Also, according to authorities, just under 20% of the country's ICU beds have been filled as of Monday. This is a sharp decline from the figures we saw throughout November and December of last year, when close to 90% of the beds were occupied.
Right, Yeon-sung, and that is good to hear, of course. But there is strong belief that Omicron will trigger an explosive surge in the number of daily infections in the near future. How are authorities here bracing for that scenario?
Well, starting from Wednesday, Wednesday of this week, health authorities are phasing into an Omicron-tailored containment strategy. One of the changes being made is shortening the isolation period for confirmed patients. If patients are fully vaccinated, they just need to self-isolate for a week instead of 10 days. Take a listen to what else this plan entails.
Rather than trying to control the size of the spread, we'll aim to minimize deaths and critical cases. We'll conduct PCR tests mainly on high-risk patients, and for low-risk people, they will be tested through rapid antigen tests at COVID testing centers.
This new system will first be trialed in regions that have seen an alarming spread of the Omicron strain, namely Gwangju, Jeollanam-do Province, and the cities of Pyeongtaek and Ansong in Gyeonggi-do Province. The new plan will also spread out the medical burden. Local doctors and health clinics will also be mobilized for COVID-19 testing and treatment. So specialized hospitals or frontline medical workers will no longer have to bear the exclusive burden of our pandemic response.
Right, I see. Yeon-sung, I understand changes are also taking place on this Monday regarding the country's vaccine pass system. Tell us more.
Right, Sunny. So vaccine pass waivers will be extended to people who have been hospitalized 6 weeks after they've got gotten their inoculation, or people who've had adverse side effects. So before, exemptions were exclusively given to people who found a causal link between the vaccinations and the adverse reactions, but now this is no longer necessary. People just need to provide their local health clinic with their hospital records or a doctor's note documenting their post-inoculation side effects. Then they'll get a waiver on their mobile QOV or QR code apps, and they're good to go.
Right, Yeon-sung, one final question before you leave us today. The extended Lunar New Year holiday is set to begin this coming weekend. And how are authorities seeking to prevent perhaps a holiday surge?
Right, so I'm sure many people are really looking toward this much needed rest in their holidays, but unfortunately, there's going to be people who aren't going to be able to rest, and those are frontline medical workers in the capital city. The Seoul city government on Sunday said that they're going to keep the doors open for testing centers, infectious diseases hospitals, and residential treatment centers throughout all of the holidays. There are also going to be a hotline in place for emergency patients. Seoul's public transportation network will also run on an extended schedule to prevent overcrowding on buses and trains. The Minister of Interior and Safety also said temporary COVID-19 testing centers will be set up at highways and rest stops, train stations, and bus terminals so that people can easily get tested and travel across the country.
Right, that is good to know. All right, Yeon-sung, thank you for the latest here on the local front. Right, meanwhile, on the international front, Omicron appears to be peaking in quite a number of countries. For more, Soa is back at the desk. Soa, do tell us more.
All right, Sunny. So while this fastest ever spreading COVID-19 strain, the Omicron variant, is making its way to all corners around the world, countries that have been already hit prior to other countries are now seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, which may not only be the end of the Omicron wave, but perhaps also the end of this pandemic. Now, one person who was cautiously optimistic that better days are to come in the U.S. was Anthony Fauci, the country's top infectious disease expert, who suggested in an interview on Sunday that the Omicron would peak by mid-February nationwide, with some pain and suffering expected affected, though, in terms of hospitalizations in regions where people have not been fully vaccinated or haven't gotten a booster shot. The average number of daily U.S. cases in the past week as of Saturday stood at around 705,700, a drop by around 15,000 from the day before, and an improvement from a weekly average of more than 800,000 infections a day as of the 14th this month. Fauci cited patterns in countries like South Africa and the UK, places that have shown sharp declines following their respective Omicron waves. Now, that wave in Europe has entered a new phase, according to the World Health Organization's Europe director, who forecasted that 60% of Europeans could be infected with the virus by March, and that it's plausible that the region is moving towards the end of the pandemic.
Right, and so moving forward, I hear public protests against prevention efforts continued this past weekend over in the West.
Right, Sunny. So demonstrations in Belgium made headlines once again, with an estimated 50,000 people marching through the capital, Brussels, on Sunday local time, which reportedly was the largest rally in the city held over the past months. Clashes occurred between protesters and police, stones and firecrackers against tear gas and water cannons. Protesters slammed the government's stringent virus prevention rules, with one of the latest measures having been announced on Friday regarding booster shot requirements 5 months after complete vaccination to have a valid vaccine pass. And also thousands of anti-mask and anti-vaccine demonstrators also gathered in Washington, D.C. on Sunday, denouncing the Biden administration's mask and vaccine policies, which had led to the adoption of mandatory rules at several businesses, municipalities, and organizations across the country. Here is what some of the demonstrators had to say.
I'm not against vaccination. I think if you want to get vaccinated, that's your choice. I'm not against wearing masks. If you want to do that, that's your choice. I'm coming out because I'm completely against mandates. I think they're unethical. I think they're ineffective.
Everybody needs to have a personal choice, no mandates at all for employers, for anybody, for healthcare workers, for anybody.
Right, and as you mentioned, so over in Israel, pundits claim the country's Omicron cases are peaking as well.
Right. A top health expert in Israel predicted on the weekend that during the coming week, the country will begin to see a decline in its daily infections. The epidemiologist, that is, said that some 40,000 or 50,000 cases a day are expected this week, following daily cases at nearly 70,000 last week, and that in 2 to 3 weeks, the fifth wave will likely be over. While the number of seriously ill patients is expected to reach around 1,000 this week, though, the expert noted the number of patients over 60 showed signs of declines. Israel's health ministry, meanwhile, said on Sunday that a fourth dose of COVID-19 vaccine in people aged 60 and above made them 3 times more resistant to severe illness than those who got 3 shots.
Right, and in neighboring China, so I understand Omicron concerns are mounting with just about 10 days left to the start of the Winter Games.
Yes, Sunny. So tensions are high as a total of 72 COVID-19 cases linked to the Winter Games have been confirmed in Beijing so far. And the cases were confirmed between January 4th and the 22nd, according to the Beijing 2022 Organizing Committee on Sunday. 39 of those were detected at entry checkpoints. Close to 2,600 tests were conducted at Beijing Capital International Airport during this period. The other 33 cases were detected from over 336,000 screenings conducted in the closed-loop management system, or the Olympic bubble. And so far, no athletes have been confirmed with the virus.
All right, so thank you for the latest on the international front, and see you on Tuesday.
See you tomorrow.
In our news segment on this Monday, we start with some dismal news within the labour market. Recent findings show the number of discouraged workers here in Korea hit a record high last year. Our Om Ji-young reports.
The number of people who've given up on finding a job in South Korea, so-called discouraged workers, surged to an all-time high last year. According to an analysis of Statistics Korea data by Yonhap News Agency, there were some 62,000 people in South Korea who wanted a job but did not look for one for more than 4 weeks because they thought they wouldn't be able to get one. That was the highest figure since data was first compiled in 2014. The number of people who were unemployed for more than 6 months last year also increased to 130,000, with around half being those in their 20s or 30s. This suggests that while the country's unemployment rate dropped last year, the long-term unemployment issue has gotten more serious. Meanwhile, the number of people employed in the manufacturing sector in South Korea has been reduced. The Federation of Korean Industries said Monday that the number of working in the manufacturing field has been showing on-year decreases for 5 straight years, falling by 180,000 in 2019 compared to 2015, close to a 4% drop. The agency attributed the fall to restructuring that had taken place in the shipbuilding and automobile industries. This led to South Korea having a smaller share of global production. The United Nations Industrial Development Organization said the country's share decreased to 3% in 2019 from 3.2% in 2015. 엄지영, Arirang News.
Also on the local front, pricier options are looking to be available when shopping for Lunar New Year presents for public sector workers this year. Our Min Soo-kyun explains.
The Lunar New Year holiday is now just a week away. And as usual, many people have started buying gifts for friends, family, and colleagues to express their love, gratitude, and best wishes. In past years, there have been strict limits on the value of gifts that can be given to people in certain jobs, like public officials and teachers, to prevent graft and dishonesty. The price limit, of course, constrained the kinds of gifts people could buy. But this year, the so-called Kim Young-nan law has been revised to allow gifts of up to 200,000 won, or about $170, which is double the previous limit. So now people can buy nicer fruit baskets and even premium Korean beef.
We had a hard time producing gift sets that included meat and produce, but now we'll be able to make some nice gifts.
The perennial favorites at major holidays are Korean beef or Hanu and fruit, but demand for seafood and health products has surged as well. Large retail stores and chains are diversifying their gift sets to offer a greater range of items in different price ranges.
We have about 700 gift sets, starting from $40 to $170. We've expanded our products by about 20% from last year.
The pandemic has made it hard to give gifts in person, but this Lunar New Year, good quality gifts are as much in demand as ever. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
The phrase Korean dream has been taking on greater prominence in recent years as many hope to carve out a permanent place for themselves within the local community. Accordingly, our Shin Yeon has met up with 4 of the major presidential camps to learn about their thoughts on accommodating this dream.
This is where migrants to South Korea start a new chapter in their lives. Many of them coming through those gates, aspiring to achieve the Korean dream. That term mirrors the American dream held by migrants to the States hoping for a better and fuller life.
This man had hoped to achieve the Korean dream by launching his own business. Instead, he has been living as an undocumented immigrant for 22 years after losing his passport.
I went to the embassy to apply for a new one, but the review process has been delayed to this day, mostly because I used to be a democracy activist back home.
He says he could be killed if he returns to Myanmar. So he tried to seek asylum, but was asked to pay a fine of over $25,000.
Of course I'd like to pay, but I can't. I earn a little over $2,000 a month. Half I send back home to Myanmar to my family. I'm asking the Korean government to allow me to pay bit by bit monthly.
There are some 400,000 undocumented migrants living in Korea, making up roughly 20% of the foreign population. all have different reasons for why they remain unregistered. It's not just asylum seekers or undocumented migrants who have problems. Anna, who is married to a Korean and has lived here for more than 20 years, also asked for a more compassionate visa policy. As an only child, she's the only one left in her family who can take care of her mother. To increase the chances of sponsoring her mother with permanent residence, Anna has applied for naturalization. But even if Anna becomes Korean, there's currently no law that would allow her to sponsor her mother's visa.
I just wish there were more systems for migrants to protect their rights.
With the presidential election coming up soon, I went to talk to the camps of all 4 presidential candidates to hear their take on migrant issues.
We will create a multicultural committee within our party and hear what problems international families face, and then create comprehensive policies. From there, we will also try to expand discussions to include immigration policies.
Many E9 workers reach very higher skills, sufficient skills. But nevertheless, they have to leave the country. Let such workers stay longer and also facilitate their transition into other types of other statuses, like E7, right, which are given to various kinds of skilled workers.
Korea needs to amend its refugee law. Refugees are basically human rights violation victims. We need to understand that their lives are at risk. We should ease the standards on who is accepted as a refugee and help them during their stay.
We have the lowest birth rate in the world. In 3 years' time, we will be an aging society. That's why immigration will be Korea's new survival tactic. To do that, our camp believes that there should be a separate immigration office or ministry in charge of relative duties so that we can avoid excessive spending on similar policies launched by different ministries.
As all camps said, immigration policies need to be reviewed and strengthened now more than ever. These policies will determine whether migrants can actually achieve the Korean dream. Shin Ye-eun, Arirang News.
In other news, as perhaps tangible proof of climate warming, new data shows 2021 was the second hottest year for Korea since the start of relevant data collection some 5 decades ago. Our Choi Min-jung has more.
2021 turned out to be South Korea's second hottest year on record. According to the Korea Meteorological Administration, the country's average temperature reached 13.3 degrees Celsius last year. This is only 0.1 degrees lower than the highest temperature recorded in 2016 and the second highest since data was first compiled in 1973. Compared to the average temperature from the period between 1990 and 2020, the latest figure was 0.8 degrees higher. Numerous regions like Seoul, Gyeonggi-do Province, Incheon, Busan, and Jeju saw an all-time high average temperature in 2021. The weather agency attributes the rise to the exceptionally warm spring and autumn caused mainly by climate change. South Korea saw the hottest March in 2021, with the average temperature reaching 8.7 degrees. Cherry blossoms bloomed 15 days earlier than usual, the fastest ever for over a century. Unlike a year earlier, last year's monsoon season was noticeably short, as it only lasted 17 days. This is only a third of 2020's 54-day-long monsoon season. Although the country saw less rainfall during last year's monsoon, the yearly amount of rainfall did not drop due to an unusually high amount of rainfall in spring. Meanwhile, close to a quarter of the world's population experienced the hottest year on record in 2021. According to a U.S. nonprofit organization on environmental data science, Berkeley Earth, a total of 25 countries, including China, Nigeria, and Iran, reported a record warm yearly average in 2021. Data from the World Meteorological Organization showed that the average global temperature was 1.1 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, close to the 1.5 degrees limit set under the Paris Agreement. This makes 2021 one of the 7 hottest years on record. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
A quicker diagnosis may mean a broader treatment option for dementia, especially if the diagnosis takes just 5 minutes. Eun-jin reports.
The patient wears a headband-type device and closes their eyes. An EEG sensor connected to 2 points on the patient's forehead and one ear reads brain waves and transmits the information to the computer. The headband was used on 122 people, which included dementia patients. Significant differences were evident in the brain waves of those with and without dementia. The more severe the symptoms were, the point marking the brain waves to be the strongest moved to the left of the graph. The existing method for diagnosing dementia is by screening test papers called MMSE, which stands for Mini Mental State Exam. This exam has an accuracy of 80%. However, the latest method of reading brain waves only takes 5 minutes and shows a higher accuracy of 82%. When sound stimulation and selective attention tests are added, the accuracy rises to 89%.
MMSE has some limitation. For example, you cannot repeat the same test again and again. So in our case, we use prefrontal EEG technique, very simple, to screen dementia patients.
This is the first time that a dementia diagnosis model has been developed that has been confirmed to be simpler and more accurate than the screening test paper method. Researchers are already on the next step of developing the technology to diagnose mild cognitive impairment, which is considered the pre-dementia stage. If risk groups can be screened earlier on in the onset of dementia, patients can participate in prevention programs sooner, which will eventually reduce the overall number of dementia patients. In collaboration with other institutions across the country, research teams aim to complete a dementia preemptive diagnosis program within the next 5 years. Ian Jin, Arirang News.
Up next, we bring you the latest in the world of finance and business here in the local front. I have Ji Abili from the Korea Economic Daily here in the studio with me. Ji, welcome back.
Hi, Sunny. So we're less than 2 months away from the 20th presidential election slated for March 9th. In sharp contrast to the Moon Jae-in administration, candidates from both parties have vowed to legislate digital assets if elected. The Moon administration has not been recognizing digital assets as legitimate investments. Just a quick wrap up on the race so far. The ruling Democratic Party has selected former Gyeonggi Governor Lee Jae-myung to succeed outgoing President Moon, while the opposition People Power Party has nominated Yoon Seok-yeol, a former prosecutor general under the same administration. Currently, there are some 7 million individual investors of digital assets in Korea, mostly on the younger side. The presidential candidates are betting that injecting legitimacy into digital assets could help win the hearts of voters in their 20s and 30s.
Right, and how do their pledges, G, differ?
Well, the Liberal Party's Lee pledged to legalize initial coin offerings, or the ICOs, and security token offerings. Yoon, the Conservatives' choice, vowed to legalize initial exchange offerings and offer tax exemptions on returns on investment. Last Wednesday, Lee Jae-myung met with the CEOs of Korea's 4 largest cryptocurrency exchanges, namely Upbit, Bitham Coin One, and Corbit, at the Dunamu headquarters in Seoul. Lee pledged to deal with the legislative vacuum regarding digital assets in a prompt manner. A major part of Lee's plans to provide business opportunities lies in putting the real estate market on a blockchain platform. Yoon, for his part, said he plans to offer tax exemptions on cryptocurrency gains of up to 50 million won, or $42,000. That's equivalent to the amount eligible for income from securities. Now, this will be a sizable increase in tax benefits from the current exemption on up to 2.5 million won income from crypto. When that will happen is unclear. Under the current law, Seoul will impose taxation on income from digital assets from next January, but industry insiders expect Yoon to delay the start date for taxing cryptocurrency income. The former prosecutor also said he will allow domestic issuance of cryptocurrencies and establish a government agency solely dedicated to promoting the industry.
Right, I see. And moving on, what's your next item, G?
Let's talk about the widespread adoption of AI humans in Korea. The artificial intelligence humans are excelling in the country's entertainment, media, and even banking sectors. For example, Eternity, developed by the AI graphics company Pulse 9, debuted last March. One of the members, named Tae-in, released her first music video 4 months ago, which has already garnered more than 2.2 million views. The main business model is creating and leasing intellectual property of premium AI humans. In addition to K-pop artists and influencers, employing AI news anchors has been quite popular here. As many of our viewers may already know, Deep Brain AI introduced a virtual anchor named Jennifer at this year's CES, modeled after a news anchor at Arirang TV. Another homegrown AI company, MindLab, developed an AI human called M1 that can recognize and understand human faces and voices. The ability to understand human speech makes it uniquely valuable in a number of industries such as banking, security, and even senior care.
Right, and news of that has been covered by our news segment, of course. Already time for our last story. Ji, I hear you have news about Tucson.
That's right. So from Saudi Arabia, Tucson Heavy Industries and Construction won a hefty order. The power plant component supplier signed a preliminary agreement to build the country's largest steel casting and forging plant for 1 trillion won, or $840 million US. Saudi Aramco Development Company, a unit of state-run Saudi Aramco and the Saudi Arabian Industrial Investments Company, or DUSR, agreed to establish a three-way joint venture with Tucson for building the plant. Tucson will take charge of the construction slated to begin this year, while the two Saudi Arabian companies provide financing. That's all for me today.
All right, Ji, then. It's been a pleasure having you here. Do take care.
Thank you kindly, Sunny.
President Moon Jae-in's trip to the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia and Egypt has served to reaffirm and reinvigorate bilateral ties on several fronts, including defense and green economy. For more on the gains of the recent summit exchanges and the tasks ahead, I have Professor Mohammed Guda from Hanguk University of Foreign Studies. Professor Guda, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Good afternoon.
I also have Professor Oh Jun-sok from Soomyung Women's University. Professor Oh, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
We'll start with you, Professor Guda. Let's begin then with a few words on the importance of Korea's diplomatic ties with the UAE, Saudi Arabia, as well as Egypt.
Thank you so much for the question. Actually, we're talking here about the three most important countries in the Middle East. Between Saudi Arabia and UAE, we have 27% of all reserves, oil reserves. In Egypt, we have one of the most populated countries in the Arab countries. We have 102 million population. So lots of potential, lots of work. And I think in the last few years, we have lots of deepening ties, diplomatic and economic ties between Korea and the Middle East, and those three countries in particular. And I think more will come, in the near future, I think, more of that.
Right, of course, we'll keep our fingers crossed for that. Professor O, what would you highlight as the gains of this particular presidential trip to the Arab world?
President Moon returned home last Saturday from Middle East tour, push for international cooperation. I could pinpoint three keywords. The first is it was economic diplomacy. It's not a diplomatic event or just a kind of political gesture. There is a concrete agenda, something like clean energy, and then clean energy and defense, and then economy. And the government, the Korean government, pay attention to what the private sector from the G2G level they could, out of which what the private sectors they need, but they cannot. And then as a result, the Korean government take the role of the trailblazer in the new market opportunity in Middle East area. And second thing we have to remember is a forward-looking partnership. Already we have a close relationship with Middle East areas, but President Moon announced the importance of the new field of cooperation, something like smart innovation in the area of healthcare and the science and technology and hydrogen and the intellectual property sectors. For the final, And President Moon raised and then suggested a package deal. It's not a product or item export or import, but a packaged system deal. They tried Saudi Arabia. They set up a vision 2030 as a kind of development plan, which means they try to moving their industrial structure from the oil-centered into the industrial diversification, which means to try to construction of industrial complex. Think about it. When you build the industrial complex, what is needed? Just completing the facilities and then investment structure, the building is made. Is that all? No. System software and then traffic control system and then even medical system and so on are needed. So in this sense that Korea could give an offer system packages with the infrastructure construction project.
Right, you can. And Professor Gooda, what is your assessment of the latest summit exchanges between President Moon and his counterparts over in the Arab world?
I think, in all honesty, I have to say it was even beyond what I expected. For a long time, since I've been here in Korea for several years, I've been always thinking about that. I mean, why Korea didn't delve more into the Middle East. I think there is huge potential. And what President Moon have done, I think it was tremendous. We have the biggest arms deal in the history of Korea, $3.5 billion. This is the deal with the UAE. We have a potential, another deal coming with Egypt with the K9 howitzer. We have potential FTAs, free trade agreements with GCC countries, Gulf Cooperation Council, and with Egypt. This will be tremendously helpful for the Korean economy. And I think also the local aspect, the public diplomacy aspect here plays a major role. I have to mention that the Egyptian president have mentioned Korea explicitly lots of times in his public speeches, talking about Korea as a role model for development. So I think this is all good news for the four parts here.
Right, it is. As Professor Gooda has mentioned, Professor O, so Korea signed its largest ever arms export deal with the UAE. What, in your view, are the implications of this particular deal between Korea and the UAE?
It might be a remarkable event. The United Arab Emirates signed an agreement to buy Korea's mid-range missile defense system in a deal worth of $3.5 billion US. The United States is the first foreign buyer of Cheongung-2, which means that the Heaven's Bow in Korea. And the system's price tag is a US $3.5 billion. It makes it that Korea's single largest defense system export deal. So in this sense, I must say that it might be a kind of due pass takers of the due export item. It is not steel, it is not shipbuilding, it is the defense system. And second, it is a system export. I mean, the system export means it is not just selling of goods to the foreign parties, but there is a technological transfer and then education system for the operating staffs and so on. There are a lot of rippling effect. For the FINAL infrastructure investment project, there is a saying that destruction technology means construction technology. So when you have to equipped with the destruction technology or defense technology, construction technology must be needed. I mean that in terms of infrastructure construction, there are a lot of chances for the Korea and the GCC states. There is a kind of commonalities for the future prosperity.
Right. And Professor Gooda, how do you explain the UAE's decision to perhaps invest in Korea's defense industry? Because Korea has been trying to change its defense industry into an export powerhouse.
Well, I have to say, I mean, what's happening with the UAE is also tremendous, as what Professor O have mentioned. The idea here is that we have a long history of trade, of arms trade between UAE and Korea. But what's happening now is that we have a major deal. And I think this deal sheds light on why UAE is taking or buying and delving into this relationship with Korea and not with other parties. And I think this is very important because usually with developed countries, countries and with countries selling arms, we have always this kind of political agenda in the footnotes, usually in arms deals. But with Korea, I think Korea is a great and strong ally in this respect. We have lots of agreements, we have lots of potential, and I think also the relationship have been tremendously helpful when it comes to no strings attached. The political parts and all that. So I think this is why Korea will play a major role, I think also more in the future when it comes to arms trade.
Right. And beyond defense, Professor O, do you tell us a bit more about the hydrogen economy, well, the accord on hydrogen economy between Korea and the Arab world, and what are the implications of cross-border collaboration on that front?
Of course, till now, we got the confidence processes between the two areas. Till now, that Korea and the GCC member states, they have complementary economic structure. And during the visit, President Moon made a projection of the future cooperation. He stressed a cooperative relationship of smart innovation growth in the area of clean energy, construction, and healthcare. Out of this field of industries, as Sonny commented, that cooperation in hydrogen will be the key. Hydrogen economy is crucial for innovation, and then hydrogen economy is a combination of green hydrogen and blue hydrogen. First, green hydrogen is a matter of production technology. So in terms of production, that GCC states, they got a huge potentiality to produce hydrogen. And second one is blue hydrogen. Is a matter of the application and then utilization technology. And then Korea's technology in hydrogen-related car industry and then fueling system and the fuel cells that Korea got a synergy effect with the GCC members. In this respect, by combining the GCC's potential to produce clean hydrogen as much as possible with the Korea's utilization and distribution capacity to apply the hydrogen technology into the real world, then I hope it will be a kind of hydrogen economy will be upgraded in the near future.
Right, and staying with such green efforts, Professor Gouda, how do you explain the dedication perhaps to carbon neutrality by the UAE, Saudi Arabia and Egypt, which will be hosting the COP27 this year, and their plans to indulge in related efforts with Korea?
Thank you, Sunny. And actually, also the COP28 will be hosted by the UAE as well.
Right.
So, so this is, of course, a major plan for all three countries. And Vision 2030 in all three countries have a tremendous emphasis on this aspect. However, the reality is not so great, unfortunately. We're looking at the latest report by UN Environmental Program published last year. It's called the Global Status Report on Renewables. We see that the Middle East have the least renewable, is the region with the least amount of renewables consumption and generation. If we, for instance, compare this with Korea, in our case, out of 12 targets and policies aimed at delving into green energy and all that, Korea have already fulfilled 10 policies, Egypt have fulfilled 6, Saudi Arabia 4, and UAE 3. So there is huge potential for this. The good news is that Korea have made a tremendous impact on UAE when it comes to Al Baraka nuclear energy plant, and with 25% of UAE's electricity consumption of UAE made by this power station, $25 billion investment. So people in the Arab world have seen Korea and have seen Korean technology, and I think there is more room for Korea to help Arab countries with this aspect.
Right, and which is why Korea and Saudi Arabia have also agreed to explore a project to develop a potentially cleaner form of energy. How feasible is this plan, do you think, Professor Gouda?
I think this is great, yeah, definitely. I mean, we're talking here, I mean, if we look at Saudi Arabia in particular, and this is what President Moon have also mentioned in his speech, talking about NEOM, which is the city, the size of the city will be around a quarter of Korea's size, and with amount of investment that's amounting to $500 billion of investment. There is a clear aim for the leadership in Saudi Arabia for such kind of energy, clean energy and hydrogen and all that. And Korea will be a major partner, hopefully. So I think now with this switch and with this, relationship now, perhaps this will materialize very soon.
Right. Professor Gooda, staying with Korea's relationship with Saudi Arabia, the two countries also have agreed to resume free trade talks between Korea and the Gulf Cooperation Council, as you mentioned, after more than a decade. Could you first tell us a bit about the Gulf Cooperation Council and its economic potential?
Of course. So the Gulf Cooperation Council was established in 1981. We have 6 Arab countries. We have Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, Bahrain, Oman, and we have around $48.8 billion of trade between Korea and those countries. Actually, 84% of Korea's trade with the Middle East comes from those countries. So this is a huge potential. And around 60% of oil coming imported by Korea is coming also from those countries. So this is huge and lots of relationship, lots of economic relationships. The good news is that if we look at a paper published actually 2 years ago in the Korean Journal of Middle East Studies talking about a simulation between GCC and Korea FTA, we found that in any case Korea will gain a lot on GDP and welfare. The gains will amount to at least 1 billion. 0.5 to up to $4.8 billion. So there is lots of momentum, lots of gain from doing this. And the good news is that, again, I'm always emphasizing the mental image. The mental image of Korea is very positive in the Arab countries. And we don't have any negative aspect like what we see with other developed countries. So I think there is a huge potential for more economic trade and more tying, as what Professor O have mentioned, relationship with manufacturing and industry as well.
You're right. And staying with the potential Korea and GCC FTA, Professor, what are some of the gains to be secured under such a deal in your view?
As Professor Gooda commented about the FTA simulation, actually there are many simulation is under study. But it is too early to say that what is the evaluation of the FTA with the Korean and the GCC. But definitely what is certain is almost 68% of crude oil import comes from the GCC states. And then out of total trade volume between Korea and the Middle Eastern region, that 3/4 goes to the GCC states. It's a huge market, and then 75% of export goods goes to the GCC states. In this sense, that the FTA means a lot for the Korean international trade in the future. And then there is a simple example. Making a FTA agreement is like getting a kind of membership card in a shopping mall, members only shopping mall. And then think about it, that you got a membership card, and then it is only members can enter into the shopping mall. You can be a customer, but you can be a supplier, and then you can find places become a producer. So even you could support kind of services there. It generates huge chances depending upon your own business creativity. So for this reason, that the FTA agreement between the Korea and the GCC state, it gave us a lot of chances in the future, and then strengthening the economic tie between two states.
Right, so it's like a comprehensive VIP membership card then. Professor Gooda, staying with free trade initiatives, President Moon and his Egyptian counterpart Abdel Fattah el-Sisi have laid the groundwork for such efforts between Seoul and Cairo. What are the implications of this advance in trade talks?
I think this is also great. Looking at Egypt, there is huge potential for Korean products. If we look at Saudi Arabia and UAE, we have high per capita incomes. We have good opportunity for high-end products, Korean products. In Egypt, we have lots of population, 102 million citizens. And Egypt also has tremendous access to Africa. We're talking here about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that was established and already ratified last year. So we have access to 55 countries in Africa with total GDP combined together as $3.5 trillion. So there's great potential. Also, again, I mean, Egypt, from the other side, Egypt depends on Korea a lot when it comes to exports. Suffice to say that 90% of electronic exports of Egypt comes from Samsung and LG companies in Egypt. So, and there is also, so the Egyptian side wants to establish more technology and more technology transfer with the Korean side. So I think this will be a win-win situation for both sides in that case.
Right, both for Seoul and Cairo. Professor, what do you propose then to ensure productive ties between Korea and its counterparts in the Arab world in the future?
From the perspective of economic diplomacy, always there are two things to remember: is the how to keep going on the sustainability and then balance the transaction between the two parties. Smart innovation might be a good commonality between the two countries, and then more than that, as Professor Kuda commented about, nowadays. With the advent of COVID-19 pandemic, trusted value chain, trusted supply chain has a lot of importance. So rather than efficiency, we have to creating a supply chain based on the trust and then confidence processes.
Right, credibility and confidence.
Right.
Professor Guda, what are your words of advice with regard to guaranteeing continued constructive cooperation between Korea and its counterparts in the Arab world?
I think it depends on the country, because we have three different countries and, of course, three different economies. With UAE, we have the powerhouse of the Middle East, and there is, again, huge potential when it comes to arms trading and when it comes to service sector and when it comes to supply chain and sustainability. There's also, I know there are some efforts going on now with the Korean side. So I think for this aspect, working together more would be sufficient. With Saudi Arabia, I think it would be great if Korea could be involved more in NEOM project. Because up to now, and I did my own research some time ago, in the Korean media in the last, I would think, 5 years, it was only mentioned for a few times, the NEOM project and all that. So I think more shedding light on this kind of project will be helpful for both sides. And I think Korean companies have tremendous opportunity in that aspect. With Egypt, I think Egypt have a different case. We are passing through, of course, we have passed through some rough time with the Arab Spring and all that. Now we're gaining momentum. The country is growing economically and all that. So what I suggest what Korea could do is something similar to what the EU have done with Egypt, with regards to something like when EU have established a free trade agreement with Egypt, they established something called Industrial Modernization Center in Egypt. And I think Korean side can do something similar to that, like involving the Egyptian industry, involving more standardization, more technical capacity, and more technology transfer. This will be tremendously helpful for Egypt as well.
Right. Professor Guda, thank you very much for your insights today and your time. Professor, as always, thank you for your thoughts.
My pleasure.
Right. Well, daily COVID-19 infections, that is, have been on a persistent rise over the past week and even into the weekend. So do take care and do abide by prevention measures. Thank you for watching. See you on Tuesday.